Thank you, thank you. I'll just roll the clicker. And yeah, hello, I'm Gurpreet, and a little bit about myself, if the clicker works. I'll scroll through here. Yeah, okay. I'm Gurpreet Singh, and I'm the lead technical writer at GameMaker. That's what this is about. So I am in charge of the manual, so that's where all you can read about GameMaker and all of its features. And I also make videos on our official channel, so I'm not just a writer. And this talk is about GameMaker, of course, so I'll be telling you what GameMaker is, of course, and also why I like it and why I stuck with it for so long. And at the end, I'll be touching upon what it can be for you. So, a little show of hands. How many of you here have used GameMaker? Okay, so a lot of people to introduce to GameMaker, so that's great. Awesome, let's get started. So GameMaker, how would I describe it in just 3 bullet points? So you can make 2D games easily. It's a 2D focused engine. And it's easy to make stuff in it if you make something in it. In my experience, it's faster to make something than most other engines. Second thing, it has visual programming, so you can learn programming visually in a drag and drop manner. Or if you just want to code, you can code as well. The language in GameMaker, it's called GML, GameMaker language, so it's its own proprietary language. And the third thing is that it can export to a lot of platforms. So all the major platforms you can think of these days for gaming, so from Windows, Mac, Linux on desktop to Android and iOS on mobile and web, and the 3 major consoles, PS5, Xbox, Switch, it supports exporting to that. And just a quick side note, GameMaker itself is available to use on Windows, Mac, and there's a beta for Ubuntu, but it should work on any Linux distro. So that's what GameMaker is, but I want to talk to you here not as an employee of GameMaker, but as someone who's been using GameMaker for 10 years, and why I like it and why I stuck with it, and how I got to be working at GameMaker. So if we go back a lot of years ago, when I was 12, I was playing games, of course, and I was always frustrated with the limitations in games, and I thought, I want to do this, I want to do that in this game, but I can't do it because they've set limitations in those games. So I thought, why not make my own games? And so I looked up on the internet, how do I actually make a game? There were a lot of results. And some of the ones that I'm showing here are some that I used back in the day and tested. And I ended up sticking with GameMaker. So there are some options here that are easy to use but limited. Some are that are very good, flexible, but they are intimidating for a beginner. So to dive a bit deeper into that, why I stuck with GameMaker back in the day. So I'm going to be comparing these 3 options. These are the ones that I actually used back then, say 10 years ago or something. I started with Sploder, which is a very easy to use game engine. It's online. But it's very limited because let's say I'm going to give you a practical example. Say there's a level and you add preset objects which have predefined shapes. You can't change much and you give them preset behavior. Like if you click on it, it jumps. If it collides with something, then it gets destroyed or explodes. So there's a limited amount of stuff that you can do. And then there was Unity, which has a system such as you have a scene, and you have game objects, and they can have components, one of which can be a C# script. And there are, of course, other components as well. And I like that system, I like Unity, but back in the day, I found GameMaker system to be much simpler. So you have just a room, and you've got an object in the room, and in that object, you can add events, and those events are triggered differently based on the event, of course. So for example, you have an event, was the object clicked on? Did it collide with something? Or was it just created? and then you program that event. And you can then do whatever you want. The system is simple, but it's flexible because you're basically programming, so you can do whatever you want. And to quickly mention, there's easy access between objects as well, something I liked with GameMaker over Unity, because if you have game objects in Unity, you want to reference different game objects between each other. You've got to do a lot of groundwork there. But in GameMaker, all objects, they are very easily available to each other. Their interactions are very easy to program and set up. So this was the reason I stuck with GameMaker. And then for a few years, I just continued making small games here and there. I was in school, actually, so I just made a new game every week, or I joined game jams. And I did that for a lot of years until I gave my 10th grade exams. And after that, we have 3 months of break until we get our results. So during that, I decided to do something with my skill, and I made my first course on Udemy. Some of you may have heard of it. So that was 2015. And that didn't do that well, of course. It was a paid course, but it gave me enough money to buy my first smartphone. And then, fast forward 2 years, I finish high school, and I decide I just want to continue doing this and go no other path. So I make more Udemy courses, spreading GameMaker, spreading game development, teaching people all about it. The course you see in 2020 was actually the last Udemy course I made, and it was my best-selling one. On the side of that, I also actually made a lot of YouTube videos, which people found very helpful. I've stopped making videos since on my own channel, of course. I make videos for GameMaker now, but a lot of people are still watching and using them in GameMaker. And on the side of doing all that, I was also doing freelancing, working as a programmer for GameMaker teams. And two of which I want to highlight. There's Tubetastic, a local and online multiplayer party game, and Ambition, another local and online multiplayer team battle game. And these were clients I worked with, both of which were artists. And they had already selected GameMaker because of its ease of use. They already had started their project, say they were a month or two into it, and they were looking for a programmer. So a couple of reasons why I saw they chose GameMaker was that they knew that it would have a faster development cycle compared to most other engines out there. They could get their idea from just being an idea to a finished product faster than they could with something else. And it was also very accessible to those clients because they were artists, they weren't programmers, but they had used GameMaker in a basic form for say 3 or 4 months. But even in that, they were comfortable with it to actually go in and make changes and understand what I had done. It wasn't like a tool that was just limited to me, the technical programmer. They could go into its easy-to-use room editor, its level editor basically, and they could design their own levels. They could prototype stuff very easily. So fast forward a bit, couple years, I ended up being founded by GameMaker, and the picture you see in the top right was actually how they got me to agree to joining the job. And so I sadly had to accept my dream job. So I work with this amazing team of people. They are based in Dundee, Scotland. But of course, that's not all of them because we have remote employees working from different parts of the world. Like me, they have me from Delhi. I work remotely. And they are an amazing team that I work with. They are based in Dundee because GameMaker actually has been worked on in Dundee for the past 15 years. It actually originated in the Netherlands, but it was bought by Yo-Yo Games. So that was my story, but we have got other people as well going through their GameMaker stories. We've had a lot of great games being made in the past decade, some of which you might have heard, like Hotline Miami and Undertale and Forager. And we've got similarly great games being made right now as well. So some of which I want to highlight. There's Fishball, a lovely story-driven game being made by I Miss My Friend Studio. They're actually present here, so you can go talk to them and check their game out. There's another space opera, a very good-looking sci-fi action-adventure that's also being developed right now by Terminus Arcade. And there's Asgard's Fall as well by Smax Games. Now, something interesting about this third game is that they had actually been working on this game in Unity for 6 months. And because of something that recently happened, they decided to switch engines and they went with GameMaker. And whatever they had made in whatever they had made in Unity in 6 months, they remade 90% of that in GameMaker in a month. And they're still working on that game in GameMaker. And of course, there are many more games being made. So I've shown you how I used GameMaker, why I used it, what people have made with it. But some of you here may be interested in using GameMaker yourself to program your own games. So how does it work? To give you a basic idea, this floating ship going around, following my mouse, I made in a couple of minutes. And this is to show you how you can get any element in your head from your head onto the screen. So you basically import an image or create it in GameMaker. It's called a sprite. GameMaker has an image editor, so you can just make your sprites in it. You then make it into an object, so you can actually program it, because the sprite was just an image. And then, so in that object, I added these 2 lines of code in an event, because I previously mentioned GameMaker works with events. So I added this in the step event, which runs every frame. So it gets the direction towards the mouse, and then it adds motion in that direction. So you've got your object, and then you just put it in your room or your level, and you are good to go. So this is how you get any idea from your head onto the screen with GameMaker, basically. And of course, if you're going to be building on this game, you go and add more objects, you add more rooms if you want more levels, you add sounds to make it more complete. And you don't just make objects by putting them in rooms, you can also create them within the game at runtime. So for example, if you want this to shoot a bullet, you would make a bullet object, and you would add the, say, key press space event, and you would say, when space is pressed, create that object. So it is that simple. That's basically how you use GameMaker. There are some other features that I also want to highlight that you can use to make your game even better. So it has a physics engine which is based on Box 2D. The example that you see here is Tube-tastic, a game that I mentioned before, and that's using the physics engine. You see these objects moving around and bouncing off of each other, and all doing it all very smoothly. This is very easy to set up with the physics engine. So for those collisions and movements, you don't need to do much code. And then there are shaders as well, which I really like. This gives you control over how the pixels being rendered for your game are actually put on the screen. So you can do basically anything with it. The example that I'm showing is a water reflection shader that I made years ago. And it's just making it a bit wavy, giving it a blue effect. But you can basically do anything with it because it's just giving you control over how your pixels are put on the screen. We have also recently added filters, and this is basically pre-made shaders that we have made for you. These are configurable in the room editor. So in this example, I'm showing you a blur effect, a pixelation effect on the enemy. There's hue saturation and color changing, color grading, and there are a lot of similar filters that we have recently added. And with each update, we're actually adding more. And then there's also the particle editor that we added recently. So in GameMaker, you have a particle system if you want these super fast effects on the screen because this is faster than just making objects if you want fire or smoke or something. But previously you had to actually code these, but now you've got a visual editor for these, so you just use it to make your particles in real time. You preview them, and you can get where you want very quickly. Now another feature I want to highlight is one of my favorites actually. It's called the sequence editor, and it's like having a video editor in your engine. So just last night, I made this in the sequence editor. This is a very basic animation, but you can do a lot with it. You can have things moving around, you can have text and sound, and the particles you're just gonna see, I made them with the particle editor, but I just made this in 10 minutes last night, so you can do a lot better if you have more time. But yeah, the sequence editor, you can use it for, say, cutscenes, or if you want like buttons popping up, individual objects and all that. People often confuse this with a skeletal animation system. This is not that. For that, we support spine. But I love sequences. So there's some features that we have and I want to highlight. But of course, we have some new features coming up as well. These are things we are working on. So first and foremost, the UI editor that we are working on. This will be a visual way to make user interfaces in GameMaker. Currently, you can still make user interfaces, basic ones, if you just make a room and you put objects in it and you place them, resize them. We have a 9-slice system as well, which you can use for buttons that scale well. But this is more UI specific in that you can have buttons, you can put them in your containers, you can have those containers be resizing responsively if they are going to run on different resolutions. Then there's prefabs, which is something I'm really excited about. So say you have 3 or 4 platformers that you're working on. You can have a prefab that's just the player that moves and jumps. And you can be using that in all of those platformer projects. And they're going to be using that same piece of objects or code. And whenever you change the prefab, all of that changes in your projects where you're using that prefab. So it's a broken up part of your project that's just reusable in a lot of projects. Then we have the new code editor we are working on, because right now the code editor is very contextual to the object editor. So if you want to be editing an object, you go into that object, then you open an event in it, and then you edit that code. You want to edit another object, you go to that object, and then you edit its code. So there's a lot of moving around. So this is going to make even faster to actually write code for those of you who are going to be programming in GameMaker, all in one place without much moving around. And there's also IDE plugins that we are working on. So right now, the IDE is, of course, what we offer you, but with plugins in the future, you will be able to make your own custom tools for the GameMaker editor. So if you're making a project that requires a custom tool, like a custom level editor or a custom skin editor or something, then you can just make that tool and integrate it into GameMaker's editor. We've actually started using this internally. So the particle system that I showed you guys before, that was actually made with the plugin system. So that particle editor that's now in GameMaker is actually a plugin. So we've got it working. We'll actually be opening it up to users sometime next year. And of course, there's more features. You can check our roadmap on our GitHub for other things that we are working on. So you've used all of these features to make a game and want to get it into the player's hands. What are the things you can do at the end? So you have extensions. For example, once I made a a mobile game, so I use the AdMob extension for GameMaker to implement ads. So these are third-party APIs that we have made work with GameMaker in the form of extensions. If you're publishing to different stores, I once published a game to Steam, and I used the Steamworks API, the extension that we have, to integrate things like lobbies and screenshots and all the other features that Steam offers. And there are other third-party services as well, of course. For example, we have a Firebase extension, which you can use for cloud storage or databases or notifications, all the stuff that Firebase offers. It's not mentioned here, but I also want to say you can make your own extensions. So for example, if you're making a game for Android and you've got a library that you want to use, you can write your own extension in Java, which is what Android mostly uses. And of course, then after extensions, you've got the ability to publish to a lot of platforms, all the ones that I mentioned in the beginning. We have got guides for build processes for all of these platforms. So if you want to know how you should actually get your game from GameMaker actually running on your device, we have guides for that. You're going to need to make minimal changes to your code, of course, as is standard with multi-platform engines. So if you made a game that works on Windows, it should work on Android as well. But of course, I say minimal changes because you're going to have to handle things like different inputs and resolution. And in addition to that, we also got platform-specific functionality. So if you're, say, making a game for PS5, you want to work with its controllers, you want to work with its triggers, you want to change the controller's colors, you have got functions for that. You want to use Xbox's ecosystem, like getting the player's gamer tag or avatar. If you want to use the NPLN networking feature on Switch, you have got functions for that. So we've got platform-specific functionality as well. So that's what GameMaker is, but what can it be for you? Because it can be a lot of things for different people depending on your needs. So first of all, of course, it can be your primary tool for making your first-party games on any platform that you want to make it on. Whether it's a hobby, you just come home from work and make some games, or whether these are commercial games like the ones that I showed you before. If it's not that, it can be your prototyping engine. We have seen a lot of people actually using GameMaker for prototyping their ideas quickly because of how fast it is to just make stuff in it. An example that I like to give is before Nintendo made Breath of the Wild, they made a 2D prototype of it to test how its environmental interactions are going to work. Of course, this wasn't made in GameMaker, but it can be, and GameMaker allows you to do this stuff much faster. And we've also heard of designers at Ubisoft actually using GameMaker to prototype their ideas before finalizing them. Apart from that, it can also be your entry into the world of game development. I know people who now work at bigger studios, they use more industry standard tools that you might have heard of. And they started with GameMaker, say, 8 or 10 years ago, which allowed them to break into game development. It can also be your tool to learn programming in a fun environment. Instead of writing code in a notepad and seeing stuff pop up, you're actually making a game and having stuff move around, collide with each other, and all kinds of fun things. And because GameMaker also has visual programming, it makes it much easier to start with if you've never coded before. The way that works is you're basically writing code, but instead of writing it, you are dragging and dropping each part of what would be code. So you're essentially learning how to code just in a visual manner. If you are going to be learning how to use GameMaker, we have got a lot of resources. So first and foremost, we have tutorials on YouTube, official ones that we make, that I make, and a lot of users also making content on YouTube. We have got our GameMaker community forums, which is very helpful. I've also myself had help from that many times when I was just an intermediate user or a beginner. You go there, ask a question, there are people to help you out. There's the GameMaker subreddit as well, and there is the GameMaker Discord, which is semi-official. We do support it, and there are staff members actually present in that Discord server as well. Now, one question I get is, what are the career prospects for GameMaker? Can I make myself a career in game development using GameMaker? So of course, if your plan is to actually publish first-party games, make them in GameMaker, that is a perfectly fine tool to do that and break into game development by making your games with GameMaker from start to end. And for the programmers as well, they wonder, can I actually make a career in programming? Now, GameMaker might not be the best tool for that because it's not using an industry standard language like Unity is using C#, but I believe that it's a great tool for actually beginners to do programming for the first time and get started with that. And it's not just programming. GameMaker can allow you to be a lot more, because when I used GameMaker, I actually learned how to do art. I learned how to make music because I did everything for my own games. And when I was selling my own Udemy courses, I learned how to do a lot of marketing and a lot of graphic design because I did all that myself. And it was GameMaker that allowed me to do that. So it just allows you to explore your creative self. I became an educator. Well, I could have gone deeper into programming. I could have gone deeper into art or anything else. And that is what GameMaker allows you to do. Now, lastly, I want to talk about the pricing for GameMaker. So it is free to use and make your game in it. The only paywall are the exports. But there is an exception. We do have GX Games, which is our own online gaming platform, and you can publish your GameMaker games to it for free. It actually supports both desktop and mobile, so you can make mobile games with it. Of course, they're not going to be native apps. They're going to be playable on your web browser on mobile. But we have that ecosystem all for free. Now, if you want to export to other platforms, we have got right now subscriptions. So there is the first one for desktop. So that includes Windows, Mac, and Linux. Then we have got desktop plus web plus mobile. So that's Android and iOS. And lastly, we've got everything plus consoles. Now, for India, I do want to say it is cheaper on Steam. That's how I actually got GameMaker when I was starting out. So if you are going to plan on getting GameMaker and you are in India, check out Steam because it's going to be like less than half the price of what it's on the website. Now, we do know that this pricing scheme is not very popular. So we are working on an update. It's going to come soon. And we haven't said this anywhere else, but it is going to make GameMaker even more affordable. So keep an eye out on our channels, on our Twitter, our blog, and our YouTube as well. And we will have an update for you. You can, of course, go to our website, gamemaker.io, if you want to download and use GameMaker. And you can scan the code to go to the same site.
My name is Nalin Savara, and my question is that I've been watching the GameMaker ecosystem for a lot of time, and as a serious developer who's been developing since before all these engines came in place, at first I didn't take it seriously, but now I realize its value and importance. So what kind of programming language is used in GameMaker? And let's say we have code in it which we've made and we want to refactor it, etc. Like, do you have a programming environment or something?
It uses GML. Of course, that's GameMaker language, its own language. And right now, the state that it's in, because it's growing a lot, But right now, it's closer to JavaScript, I would say. It's very close to JavaScript. I know someone who actually was a web dev and very well versed in JavaScript, and they came into GameMaker and felt at ease with it. So yeah, it uses that GML. It's close to JavaScript. In terms of refactoring, I didn't understand your question
Okay.
sadly.
So let's say I have some GameMaker code and I want to integrate it. Let's say I'm shipping a game onto Android and I want to rearrange the parts of the code and redo parts of the code as native code, say in Java. Or let's say I'm shipping it on Windows and I want to tie it to a C++ library. So then in that case, like, can it talk to a different language? like I, uh, like on Android, like when we are doing Unity and C sharp, we can literally embed Java Android code into the C sharp. So can we do something like that with GameMaker also, that we can write native modules or embed
Yeah,
native code
so
into it?
that you can do with extensions. Like I mentioned, we have extensions like Firebase and all that. So you can actually make your own extensions. For example, like you said, if you're making a game for Android and you write a Java extension that uses a certain library that you want to use, you can inject that into GameMaker. So that extension is actually usable in your game, and you can call functions from that extension. So you need that extension as a middle layer between the library that you want to use and your game. So that's something you're going to have to write if GameMaker doesn't already offer that extension. But yes, that is possible.
Okay, and it's possible with the free version also, or only with the paid version?
With the free version, yeah, it's possible to make it. But of course, if you want to be testing it on Android, to export it to Android, you need the paid version for that.
Got it, got it. Thank you so much, Gurpreet.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ria. So my question is, if you do visual coding, is there like limitations?
That's a good question. The way visual coding works in GameMaker is, let's say you have a function in code that you want to write. We have a visual version of that, right? Let's say the function is move and collide. We have got a visual version of it. So you say add an if condition, and then you drag the action, we call it actions, which are visual versions of functions. So you drag those in and you use that to make your game. And as far as coding goes, there aren't limitations. What you can code in GML code, you can make it in visual. But there are some functions that don't have visual versions. But that doesn't mean that you can't use them. It just means that you have to know what the code version of it is called, and then you can call it visually. So there is that. We've got a limited set of library where you have those visual actions. But yeah, you can basically access all of GameMaker's capabilities through visual. So it doesn't limit you. It's just about understanding it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
An extension to her question about the visual coding system. Is it a different system that adapts the programming language, or is it it takes the programming language and makes it visual?
It's a layer in front of the programming language. So let's say you have, like the example I gave, you have an if condition and you have a function attached to it. Behind the scenes, that's just code. You can actually, in GameMaker, just right click, select live preview, and it's going to show you the code behind that in real time. And as you change it, you can see the code behind it. Okay. So it's just a layer in front of it.
So then if I write a custom module, will it appear in the visual coding system? Like,
if you write like a custom function?
A module, like, earlier we spoke about
like
getting a Java module like that. Yeah, extension.
It won't appear, but like I said in the previous answer, if you want to use a function that you know exists in the code version but doesn't have a visual front, you can still call it, right? So it's the same with extensions. You know what the function is called, you can call it. So
Thank you.
it doesn't offer any limitations. It's like completely usable.
Sir, I wanted to ask if there's what's the difference between GameMaker and making games in Unity or Unreal like engines? Is it easier to make a game in GameMaker compared to Unity and Unreal?
First of all, I would limit this comparison to just 2D because GameMaker is a 2D focused engine. So of course, if
Yeah,
you
I'm
want to
asking
focus
about
to
2D games only, not 3D.
yeah, so it is faster.
Yeah.
I'll talk about my experience.
Yes.
Of course, Unreal, like if I put it on a spectrum of like easy to hard to use for an indie developer for a solo, I would just put Unreal out there because it's like, for me, it's not an option. Unity, I've used it, and personally, if I can make something in Unity, which I've also used for years,
Yeah.
if I can make it in 3 hours in Unity, I can make it in under 1 hour in GameMaker, just because of its simplicity. Um, previously, I did make a comparison, like how Unity works and how GameMaker works, and why GameMaker is simpler. So it is faster to make stuff in it. The way you interact between objects is much more intuitive in GameMaker because you don't have to worry about making references and stuff. It's all globally available.
Yes.
And also one major detail between Unity and GameMaker is that GameMaker actually works with pixels.
Yes.
So if you've got like your room, your level, and you've got pixels in that room, each pixel there actually directly corresponds to the pixel on the screen. And of course, on top of that, you can do scaling and stuff.
Yes.
So it's much more fit for 2D, especially pixel art.
Yes.
In Unity, I've heard people making games, 2D games, even pixel art games, and just having trouble with their pixel art having perfectly appear on the screen. Unity just doesn't work well for that. So yeah, at the moment, from my experience, that is the comparison that I can make.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions, guys? Anything? Oh, sure. Let's go.
Hey Gurpreet, this is Nalin Savara again. My question was that can you tell us examples of some games, some commercial games that are made in GameMaker? Because then we can download them or we can look at them or we can see videos of them and understand the kind of things that people do with GameMaker. You know, because 2D games, logically we can keep racking our mind that is it this? But since you will be exposed to that information, if you could share some and recommend some also for us to play, then we can experience the power of GameMaker.
That's an awesome question. So I'll just go back to the last slide. So that's our website, and there we've actually got a showcase page. So
Okay,
if you just
on
go to, like,
gx.games.
no, GameMaker.io. So
Okay.
if you go GameMaker.io/showcase, we've got a lot of games that we have recognized. So you can check them out. Most of those games, almost all of them should be released. So you can go and check that out, yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks a ton, man.
Thanks.
Hi, Gurpreet, Pratik here. I had a question about the stability of the engine, and you showed that a lot of new features are being added, and how does that affect like games that are being made on it for a long time, and what the engine will support?
Well, for games that are being made for a long time, we have LTS versions as well. But of course, we are working on making our regular updates more stable because we have had, especially earlier in this year, complaints that the stable versions that were being released had some bugs. What I can tell you from my experience working here is that we delay releases a lot. Previously, we went with a monthly release schedule to give more regular updates. But recently, we find ourselves skipping some months because we want to give more stable releases to our users who are actually using the latest version. And we keep the beta version for actually the updates that they want to get regularly or they want to test something before it lands into the stable build. So yeah, we are working towards that, making our stable builds actually more stable. And we don't mind delaying a release if it means it gets more proper QA testing and it actually doesn't cause any problems. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thanks. We've got half a minute, so we can do one more question.
Does it support like spline? Can I import spline animation?
Sorry?
Spline animation, can I?
Spine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does support spine actually.
Okay.
So yeah, anything you make in spine, it's actually very easy to use in GameMaker, and I've actually worked with projects for clients who are using spine. And yeah, it works very well. It has functions as well for, like, if you want to change animations and you want to attach stuff to bones, you know, it's got complete spine support.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And time's up. Great. Thank you so much for sticking around. And if anyone does have any other questions, I am